Hi, everyone. Welcome to the BizDev Podcast, the podcast about developing your business. I'm David Baxter, your host. And for the very first time, I have no Gary Voigt. And so I have no one holding me back, and it's going to be great. More importantly, I have Alice Lutz with me, and she is joining me as the former CEO of Triangle Family Services. And she is currently on sabbatical, and we are going to talk about both of those things in just a little bit. But before I dive into that, first, welcome. Hi, Alice. How are you?
Thank you. Glad to be here. Thanks, David.
I wanted to talk about sabbaticals because I think that's very interesting. You're on one, which I hope that's going well. But this is something that vacation and taking time off and all of that sabbaticals is something we don't talk a lot about. American culture is work, 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 work. And I think it's some people are leaning into more life balance kind of stuff, more of the sabbatical to pursue personal, goals. And I think that's awesome. My business group, I've said this a few times, but I'm a member of a group called C12, and they encourage executives to take a week of vacation per quarter, which I struggle to do. My wife has been very adamant that I need to try harder. So last year I did it for the very first time, and this year I'm working on it. There's always a part of me, and I'd be curious your thoughts here. There's a part of me that says if that feels guilty for taking time off because I'm leaving and my team is not. It used to be that I was afraid that I would leave and the company would fall apart, right? Being a small business. But now it's kind of a guilt thing. Like they're not taking a week per quarter. They just don't. We have unlimited PTO, but people take a couple of weeks a year generally. So there's a guilt thing there, but I'm just curious, what are your thoughts on vacation? You ran Triangle Family Services for 14 years. So you clearly had some thoughts on this, I'm sure, with your executive team and whatnot. So what are your thoughts on vacation in general?
Well, I think there's two different questions, sabbatical and vacation. So
Sure.
the sabbatical piece of it, I want to address first, because I think that that's really important to think about. Like how I personally got here was the readiness of the agency. When you look at the turnaround that happened with the agency, paying off the building, the executive leadership in place, the all of the goals, kind of no long-term debt for the agency. Board had just redone their bylaws. A new board in place, committed to 2 to 4 years. I mean, there were just a lot of factors. And when I did the kind of Ben Franklin thing and laid it out, there had never been a better time for the agency to go and do a search for the new CEO. The second piece of that was that the CEO was going to be given, as I say, like this nice wrap package of, oh my gosh, move forward. It was just a readiness of the agency, especially coming out of COVID. I think that the other piece about it is that when you look at a sabbatical, the preparedness of what you need to do to enter that period in your life happens a long, long time. For me, it was 3 years, actually a little bit longer than that, and then COVID hit. And so then after COVID, I looked again at Ben Franklin and said, okay, everything is in place now. So I really was looking to make a change years ago and or take a break and maybe some extended vacations. So then I want to speak to the vacation piece of your question. It's not about the guilt and will the agency fall apart. And, candidly, I think that the next generation of workers coming in do have a lot more of a lens by which they view work-life balance. They're not afraid to take that week once a month sometimes, and so it's really looking at how can you regenerate and recharge on a regular basis. To me, that's the essence of what we as leaders need to be looking at. And so what does that mean? Does it mean you have to wait until once a quarter to take a week? Probably not. It means that you need to take these bite-sized pieces on a regular basis to make sure that you are balanced.
Nice. And there's so many questions there that came to mind when you were speaking. I want to back up for a second. You keep mentioning this Benjamin Franklin thing. I know who he is, not that out of touch, but what do you mean by that? What is that?
So when you look at, and this is what he used to do when he was looking at some of his analysis, he would do the pros and the cons on either side. And so then that's when you would make some of your definitive decisions based on your Ben Franklin, like where's the weight of what you have. And so my pros far outweigh the cons of not moving forward with my sabbatical.
So is that a business philosophy? Is there a book on that? How did you come to be, or did you just really enjoy Ben Franklin and that's just your go-to?
It's a business philosophy, and I'm
Okay.
sure that there's books written about it, and I'm sure I must have read it someplace because I picked it up from somebody.
Sure.
So yeah, I just have always kind of looked at the analysis and really analyzing. So I didn't wake up one day and have that burnout feeling. I didn't wake up that day and think, oh my God, I've got to get out of here. I'm going to go crazy. I really worked into what I was going to be doing. Retirement, I'm going to use that in quotations, and or sabbatical, and or a break. And so for me, about a year, well, almost 2 years ago, I got a puppy after my German Shepherd dog died. And in that, I wanted to do therapy visits, service therapy dogs. So I got my dog with the whole purpose of doing business therapy, service therapy for people in business, as well as students, as well as elderly, hospitals. And so I had to do, 8, 9 months of training for that dog. And so that was my outlet when you look at that balance piece. And that was my goal that I was leading towards. And so my dog got, certified at a year old. And so I retired January 1st, and January 2nd, I started agility work with her, which is another kind of discipline to do with dog training. And I do service therapy visits. So my outlet is that whole piece of giving back. My passion for the work that I've been doing my whole life didn't go away. I've just pivoted to a new place. Now, what's ironic about all of that kind of dawned on me is I'm doing a lot of training now. And I went from being the leader making decisions to being the subservient being told what to do. It's a very humbling experience from a
Sure.
leadership perspective, and one that I'm enjoying because I'm not having to make any decisions other than how to discipline my dog today. But yeah, it really is a planful way to approach the phases and journeys that we're going through in our life as leaders.
Man, yeah, I've said many times, I think I'm unhireable at this point because I have been doing this now 10 years. And the idea of just being another cog in a machine kind of gives me hives. And I'm also now nomadic. Like there are days I wake up and go, I don't have any meetings today. I'm going to go to a coffee shop. Like that's something I have done just now for 10 years. And so I imagine being the low man on the totem pole. I could see it as freeing in one way, but I could see it also as very frustrating. I'm probably at some point I could totally see what you're doing. So it's funny you talk about a new puppy. So we just got a new dog. We just signed that we only get shelter dogs. That's a rule at our house. And so we just signed the paperwork. We use a company called Paws for Life.
Yeah.
And we just signed the paperwork. And you're talking about your dog being like certified and agility trained. We're just trying not to get our dog to not like eat the furniture. So it's like you're in a very different space than we are. The funny thing is, so our dog came to us from the shelter. He was at a foster home, and his name was Baxter, which is unfortunate. That's my last name. And so we were like, either that's a sign that this is our dog, but it was driving me nuts. I couldn't call him that because I just couldn't do it. My son is called Baxter at his school. So every time we'd be like, no, Baxter, don't do that. He was like, what'd I do? And so it got all sorts of strange stuff. His name is now Tux. Of course, he has no idea that's true. And so we are in the throes of figuring out what to do. He's a year old, and he's a pugador, which of course he's a mutt, so who knows? But in theory, he is a pug Labrador,
Huh.
which is just the weirdest mix. He's like got a big pug head and little bitty ears, and he's a hot mess. But
That's
anyway,
awesome.
it's kind of funny.
That's awesome.
So, how did you get involved in was dog training, dog service? Is that something you've always loved and just finally had the opportunity to do, or is that a new hobby? Where did that come from for you?
It's a new hobby. I've always done rescues as well. This is my first dog that I've gotten that it wasn't a rescue. And so my mom was in the hospital about 6 years ago now, and she was extremely sick. And there was a therapy dog that would come in and visit. And every time they came in, I saw the light in her eyes go on, and I saw this love and this this moment of normalcy. She was sick and dying, and the world was crashing in around us, but yet you had this moment. And so I thought, gosh, that would be so cool. And so I just started telling people that's what I'm going to do. And then it became like, oh crap, that's what I got to do, And so then I started doing research, and I started calling trainers. Again, I've always just had dogs, right? Never trained them or whatever. I don't know what I'm doing. And there's a lot to training dogs, just like training up leaders, just like training up employees. I'm sorry to make this comparison for some people
Oh, I
that
love it.
aren't dog lovers, but I'm telling you, there are so many similarities between what you do with training a dog and what you do with training staff and training kids. I would argue all three of those, because you have to really look at it from both sides and trying to analyze. You can't understand what dogs are thinking sometimes, right? Well, sometimes we superimpose what we think people are thinking. Well, you don't know what they're thinking. And so if you make it consistent, you make it persistent, you make it, predictable, bingo, you've got it. And so a couple of trainers I very quickly, put off because of lots of different reasons. And so I found a trainer. And so I started when she was 8 weeks old. And so I've just kind of continued it. And I don't know, when I do these therapy visits, I truly don't know who is benefiting more, the dog, the person or people I'm with, or me. I leave so full.
That is so cool. So my story on therapy dogs, my daughter years ago, she's 15 now. I think she was 7. She broke her leg very badly, and it was a compound fracture. She was in the hospital, and she gives me grief about this to this day. So she was in the hospital for 2, 3 days. And every time the therapy dog would come over, it would come to me and I would love on it. And she'd be like, I'm the sick one here. Why are you taking the dog? And I'm like, I can't help it if the dog loves me more.
That's right. That's right.
And so she gets still to this day. So 8 years later, she's still mad at me about the therapy dog, but he was so cute. And so, but it's the same thing. I mean, she would light up because hospitals, I've been in the hospital before, and there's nothing so lonely as sitting in a hospital bed by yourself. I mean, family can come and visit for a couple hours here and there, but most of the time you're on your own. And the doctor, of course, takes an act of God to come visit. So you don't see them. And the nurses are busy. And so any interruption in that monotony is wonderful. And then, of course, a dog itself is, if you're a dog person, I would imagine if you're not a dog person, it's not quite the same, but
That's right.
it is such a wonderful thing because all they are is love. They just want to be loved and to give you love. And it's a very, very easy thing. And so I've always loved that service that people offer. It always makes me chuckle. There are people who make their own service dogs, right? Not because they want to help people, but because they just want to take their dog everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's like those give a bad name because it used to be you saw a dog with a vest on. Like that was a big deal. That dog you knew was well behaved and was so amazing. And you would be like, oh, that's so cool. And now you're like, is that real?
Right.
Are you just
Right.
doing that? But no, it's very cool. Very cool. So
So
is that what you're, go ahead.
Well, I want to go back to your question about sabbatical again, just for a second,
Yeah.
because I think the thing that's really interesting that almost stops people in their tracks, because I was, had such a high profile job and I did so much at the agency for so long. It's like, what do you do in your retirement, at your free time now? I'm like, I'm bringing love to people. What? And it really is like that moment where it's like, oh my gosh, that's what you do? And yeah. That's what I do.
I love to be able to have that. I mean, it's so rare that people are given or earned, I shouldn't say given, have earned the ability to do that, right? So you've been successful. You've been able to take the time and to do something that's purely altruistic, right? And like in my family, they work until they can't, right? And and because of the way my family has been, I've always been very cognizant of that. Is I don't want to end up that way.
Right.
I want to be able to retire at an age at which I can still do stuff like that,
Yep.
to help others or to just relax but still be active. My father he worked until he was too sick to work, and and he was, because of that. And I think it was also a mind shift. I could go on this soapbox for days, but he was expecting, you would ask him, hey, what's your retirement plan? He'd say, I'm going to work till I die. That was
Yeah.
his thing my
Yeah.
whole life. And but the problem is he got sick and he couldn't work. And because that was ripped out, that wasn't in his plan, that wasn't in his mindset, it really affected him from a mental perspective, because that was his purpose. That was the only thing that he got up in the morning to do. He sold houses. He was very, very good at it. And he would get up every day, put on his suit, and go sell houses, right? That's what he did. And he lost that suddenly. No plan, no nothing. And it just crushed him. And it still
Right.
is to this day. And so it's having that mindset of the job is not everything, which is, for a small business owner, that's saying a lot, right?
Right.
It's one thing if you are working for someone else and you love your job or not, right? A lot of people don't love their jobs. You can say, well, I'm going to quit someday and I'm going to retire and it's going to be great. And I'm going to play golf or whatever, help dogs.
Or
And they're
pickleball.
like, yeah, pickleball,
I did pick that up.
My wife told me, we've been looking because our kids are getting older, and I can change subject on a dime. I apologize. See, Gary's not here. This is what happens. So my wife wanted to try pickleball. So she goes and tries it with a friend. I was not there. I was out of town, actually. Decided she hated it. So I never get to play pickleball ever.
So I picked that up in my retirement too. So I do that a couple of days a week.
So I still want to try it someday. I want to try it.
It's fun. Anyway, sorry, we got off the subject.
No, it's fine. It's all good. It's my podcast, right? So the oh man, now I lost my train of thought. So we're talking about retiring and having a mindset that your job is not your entire purpose. Man, that's big. That's a big shift, especially if you've owned the business, you started the business, it's your baby. Like I've got some friends who their father, it's a family business. Their father was the CEO for 20, 30 years. Grandfather founded it. And the father is retired. However, he will not let his son run the business.
Mm-hmm.
He's not in the business. He doesn't come to work. His son is running it for practical, but he owns none of it. And the dad collects this big old fat salary for no reason whatsoever, right? He's just, this is my company. I'm not letting it go. And so the company is suffering because of it, because they have to pay this huge thing out with no return on it, right? And that's also not what I want to do, right? I don't want to either I sell it or I give it to my son or child or daughter, whatever, but let go, right? And so it's just, there's all these things that as a business owner, I built this. This is mine. It's all mine, especially if you're first generation. This is all mine. This is what I'm here to do. I would challenge you that it's not, and find something greater in your golden years, as whatever you want to call them, so that if you have to stop working, even unexpectedly, it's not so life altering in terms of, mentally crushing.
I'd love to reflect on that, because I think that that's a
Sure.
really pivotal point on how I got to like where I am right now and being at peace with it all, is because, prior to Triangle Family Services, I had my own consulting business and I was doing organizational and capacity building work for nonprofits around the state. And so I was very successful, very happy over there, came over to run the agency with the intent of turning it around. I did not anticipate being there longer than 5 years. And I was very vocal about that. I mean, when they hired me, I'm like, I'm going to turn this baby around. The ship was going down like a Titanic. We're going to fix this thing and I'm going to move on. Well, then I fell in love with the population that I was serving. And in falling in love with the population I was serving, I stayed there for 14 years or whatever. And so in doing that, though, I always knew I would go on to something else. And so that whole transition of my passion didn't stop. And I still have that passion and I'm still working with that population. And so I'm just doing it in a very different way. And it's freeing in some ways. I don't have 60 people I have to babysit on a daily basis.
Sure.
I think the last piece of that I'd love to reflect on for just a second is when you're the person that comes in and is the turnaround person. So, you're righting the ship. You're, really restructuring, eliminating a third of the staff, consolidating from 3 locations to 1 location, and then you end up at the end of that 13 years or whatever, having the building paid off, no long-term debt. Then suddenly everyone thinks, oh my gosh, she's there forever. Well, candidly, I did my work,
Mhm.
that and then some, and so it's like that is the time to hand over the reins to somebody who can take it to another level. I mean, the agency grew from what 1.6 or 1.8 million to 6.5 million. And that's a big growth in a short period of time. At a
Sure.
time when COVID happened, at a time when there were a lot of disruptors, you think about mental health, you think about domestic violence, you think about child abuse, all of those things. This agency was like this almost mini case study for businesses to look at, like, how do you take this, grenade that's thrown at you and say, okay, let's hold that off. Let's fix this over here. And so it's a little bit like that little Dutch girl with the, finger in the dike, trying to figure out how to stop this main, water from breaking. But then when it's done, entrepreneurs in general have that competitive spirit and the desire to make things better, right? When things get kind of all on an even kill, it's like, well, I'm a little bored over here. Let me go do something different, And so there's another project in me out there. I don't know what it is, and I'm certainly not looking. I'm at peace and I'm happy with everything I'm doing in my life right now. I mean, I read 7 books this last 5 weeks. And it has
Wow.
been, yeah, I love to read. And so
Now,
it's
were they
just
personal books like fiction, or was it like businessy growth books?
both.
Okay.
Both. So I did Braving Wilderness with Brene Brown. I did the 2 West Moors, which is about this true story of these 2 Black guys that grew up in Baltimore. One was a Rhodes Scholar and one went to prison. I read We're Not Like Them, which is a novel that looks at a shooting of a Black boy by a police officer, a white police officer. Talk about timely right now.
Hmm.
So I read Carrie Soto is Back, which is like this mindless novel that you can get through. I mean, it was good, but so I just kind of just started. I've always loved to read. I rejoined my book club. I started a book club like 26 years ago. And over the last 10 years, I put my life on hold, like many people who, again, are in the midst of turnarounds. And so then I went back to my book club, and it's just fun to nurture that side of me again.
That's very cool. So I do want to step back because I know we've talked about the Triangle Family Services, but we haven't explained what they are. You ran it, but just 30,000 foot view. What did they do? What do they do?
So, Triangle Family Services is an 85-year-old human service agency that helps families in crisis. Essentially, we wrap our arms and our services around people. 85 years ago, when nonprofits were started, when Triangle Family Services was started, the norm was to have families in crisis go to a central point, and then that agency would be able to wrap services around the family instead of families around services. Pendulum has swung where now people have to go here, there, and everywhere in order to get services, and they really are in crisis. And if you've ever been in crisis, you don't even know where to turn. And so, with the pendulum swinging back, I think that Triangle Family Services is positioned to be in an incredible growth period. And so, the way that they provide those services is through mental health, domestic violence work for domestic offenders, the batterers of domestic violence, supervised visitation, housing program, street outreach, and a couple other programs, supervised visitation. So just a whole host of programs, 3 service areas, 14 programs under one roof for $6 million.
Wow. So my ignorance has said to me, how do you get like the let me rephrase that. The path to CEO of a nonprofit is different than the path of a CEO of a for-profit. And I don't know why I think that, but I'm like, how
Okay.
do I guess in my head, and I'm guessing I'm not alone, which is why I'm mentioning this. In my mind, nonprofits don't have any money, and therefore, how do they bring in good talent? Right? That's in my head, right? And I'm
Yeah.
sure a lot of people think that, because it's weird. Like, charities are such an interesting beast in that every single one of them, before you give money, you're encouraged to go and see how they're rated. And one of the big things that they're rated on is how much of the money you give goes to the service they provide versus the administration.
That's
Right.
right.
And the higher that number is, meaning like 90% of the money you give goes to the thing that they do, and only 10% or 8% or whatever. And that gold standard is how small is that number for the administration. Okay, so that's in my head. So now I'm thinking, okay, I've only got 10% of the money to run the place. So that must mean they're nickel and diming it, and they don't have any money to pay top dollar people. So again, this is probably all falsehood, but this is how I
I think
imagine it. So how do you, like, someone who's talented and skilled and driven, why would you ever want to be the CEO of a nonprofit, as opposed, except for calling, which that's an easy thing, and maybe that's
yeah.
always the answer.
Yeah.
But you're an amazing human being who's very talented. You've got your pick of both. The money is all. Am I wrong? Is my assumption wrong that there is no money? CEO's got to get paid well. I mean, Red Cross dude's got to be getting paid pretty
Yeah.
decently, right? But is everything I said correct, or is that a fallacy?
Well, there's a lot in that you said. And I think that I think the perception of what you said is very real. I think there's a couple
Mm-hmm.
of things. One is that nonprofits doesn't mean non-money, is that there has to be money to operate. And so one of the things that I believe, and one of the things that really allowed me to step away from my business and run Triangle Family Services, is that there's this model that we need to look at that brings the entrepreneurial spirit, the corporate type of approach, the nonprofit sector, the philanthropic sector together, and meshes it into making it a sustainable organization. And so one of the pieces of Triangle Family Services that candidly, I'm very proud of, is that I grew the client generated fee portion of what we did, so that then it wasn't related on David giving 100% in order to fund this agency. About a third to 35% of that agency was through client generated fees. The second piece about it is by consolidating into one location and bringing all services underneath one roof, we use the space 7 days a week from 7 in the morning until 9 at night. And so there were all these different agencies and programs operating on a regular basis, some of which were billable. So then that last piece of it is the attracting and retaining talent. I think that is probably going to be the single most challenge that we continue to have in the nonprofit sector with the current economic climate, which is positive for most people, but the unemployment rate is really low. And so that means that we have to figure out how to compete, right? And how to retain that talent. So I want to go back to that client generated fee. Well, then if I start adjusting my client scene, I call them butts and seats. So like therapists can see 30 people a week in the private practice. We lower it to 20 a week. Well, I've reduced my income. So that means either I need to raise rates. Okay. People that come to us, 86% are at or below poverty. Probably not something. Or I need to figure out how to subsidize. How do we hold some of the organizations, corporations, municipalities, government funders kind of accountable to saying, okay, we want you to help subsidize this. This kind of comes into are we measuring outputs? Or are we measuring outcomes? And I think that that's a real critical piece. And I think that when we look at some of the analysis that needs to happen for nonprofit organization, I was extremely data driven. So when I went in to talk to the county manager, I brought my numbers with me because that's what's going to resonate with them. What's not going to resonate with them is some of the heartstrings that might, compel David to give money, but it's not going to propel David Ellis, our county manager, to say, sure, I'll increase your funding by X amount. And so those are the things that I think that we as leaders need to look at, how we're bringing leadership in to make these decisions. Unfortunately, what people tend to drive towards nonprofit organizations and what drives people to nonprofit organizations is passion. And so I want to help people. Well, so what? We all want to help people, and so this bleeding heart syndrome of saying, I just want to go to work every day and feel good. Well, no, you're not going to go to work every day and feel good about what you do, because sometimes you're going to have to exit people out of programs. Some people are going to have suicide. Some people, these are real things that happen on a daily basis, and so you're not going to feel good every day. But what you are going to be able to do at the end of the day and the week and the month and the year and the quarter, or whatever, is to look at how can you take this and be able to position the organization for long-term sustainability so that that next generation can be seen. And that's what made me interested and intrigued in helping to turn the agency around. And then what kept me there was seeing that mother who finally got help for the daughter who was sexually abused by the dad, and all of those things that actually keeps it going. But it is going to be a challenge. The last piece I'll say is that the retaining talent is going to get incredibly more difficult, because when you look at human services and the credentialing that I believe needs to happen in order for you to hire the people in human services, is that there needs to be a funnel by which people are filling in. The funnel's not full. The funnel used to be like this. The funnel's like this. And so because of that, you don't have enough people coming into that industry. So how do we partner with organizations, companies, to make it palatable, and also, I hate to use the word sexy, that's not the word I want people to leave with, but to how to make it enticing for people to want to stay in the nonprofit sector.
That it's so interesting to hear the leadership side of nonprofit. Most of our guests have been, of course, for profit, and so it's the same concepts, but the lens is slightly different, and it's really fascinating. So on that note, I want to end our conversation. We always ask the same question, but I want to put it in that lens. So let's say, so most of the people who listen to our podcast are people who are thinking of starting a business. They've started a business. They're struggling. They're succeeding. Whatever, right? But they're usually pretty early on, and at least that's our goal. But I want to phrase your question through the nonprofit lens. If I am an aspiring entrepreneur, I have that mindset, but I really want to do good in the world, and I want to do it through a nonprofit that I want to start. What would be your top 3 pieces of advice for that person specifically?
Define what it is that you're most passionate about. Is it animals?
Okay.
Is it people? Is it kids? Is it adults? Is it dementia? Is it cancer? Is there something that happened in your life? Really narrow it down to what that is. Do your research. I believe that what we as partners need to be looking at are the people that are providing the work that you're passionate about, credentialed to do that work. If they're not credentialed to do that work, have they not had training? Have they not had some sort of, outcomes, some sort of deliverables that proves that what they're doing is not doing any more harm to the population being served? However you define your passionate population, right? Walk away from them. Because I think so often people are like these do-gooders who start these nonprofits or get into the business, and they're actually doing more harm, candidly.
Because they don't know what they're doing. I mean, what is it that they're causing? They think is it ignorance that they're saying, if I do this, that's going to help. And they're just ignorant of the fact that no, because if you did this, these other ping pong balls just moved and the population got hurt. Is that what you're saying?
And all of that, and that they might have superimposed their experience. Like, say that I was involved in a domestic violence situation years ago, then I might say, oh, I know what needs to happen with you. This is what needs to happen. Well, actually, there's a lot of research that looks at ways that you can approach domestic violence. It's not one size fits all. And so sometimes people who have that experience, whether it's being homeless or hungry or whatever, they superimpose their own kind of values and their own outcomes to what you need. And so where some of the evidence-based work happens and some of that training happens is around work that is evidence-based. And there's a high probability, not to say that then I'm become prescriptive for you, David, but it's to say that these are the things that probability based on my knowledge is going to help you the most.
Okay. Makes sense. So what would be your next piece of advice?
So then the third thing I would say is that you really need to start with having a conversation with the leader within that sector that you've defined. Number one is you define what that passion is. Number two, you figured out like, okay, it's a reputable organization. They are doing the work that they say they're going to do, and the outcomes are really strong, and they're trained to be able to do that. Three is I'd start at the top and have conversations. So oftentimes the port of entry is at the volunteer level, where you go out to a run or a walk or something like that, and you're not really getting into the nuts and bolts. So maybe starting on a committee, start on the finance committee, an events committee, start on a, get in there and really get to know the leadership to see if this is something that you can align yourself with. There's some organizations that might be culturally conservative to what your personal views are. Well, that's not really going to serve your soul to serve time with that organization and to give your time, talent, and treasure. You need to make sure that they're aligned with what you personally believe in. So I think that would be the third thing. I think that the thing that I would love to share for everybody is to stop and write your personal mission statement. Your personal mission statement. Mine I wrote over 20 years ago. Actually, it's probably been 30 years ago now, is do something for someone else every day, especially yourself.
I've heard the concept of a personal mission statement many times. I don't have one. I don't know why I don't have one. I have no good reason.
That's your homework, David.
Do I get homework now? All right, man, what happened? My podcast, I get sideways. I get homework. Wait a minute.
But it's really a powerful way to say, are you living into your personal mission? Think of how long it takes you to write your company mission statements, business. I mean, oh my God, there's retreats after retreats of writing.
Sure.
I mean, if I had to sit in another room to write a mission statement, I'd probably go screaming crazy out of that room. But yeah, if you write that down, then back to your question to me about what pieces of advice I'd give to somebody is, if you have that personal mission statement, then that makes your search of how to get engaged pretty darn easy.
But it would have to be pretty specific, right? I mean, if your thing is just you want to help people, okay, that's cool. There's a bazillion ways to help people, right? So, I mean, that's where now we got to narrow it down, which was your first piece of advice.
That was my first piece of advice, is to say, okay, find out, go into your soul, talk to your family, talk to your friends. Actually, here could be another homework assignment for you, David, I'm kind of liking this job, is to say to people who know you most, what do you think I care the most about? What do you think that is of my greatest interest out there?
That would be scary, right? I mean, you're really putting yourself out there. Like, what is important to me in your eyes, right? Because everybody talks about what's important to them, but for someone else to say what it looks like from the outside, someone told me, if you ever want to see what someone truly cares about, look at their bank account.
It's true.
And it's and you put that lens on yourself, man, that's powerful, because you say one thing, but your bank account says you go out to eat all the time.
That's right. That's right.
And that's a very sobering thing. And I think that's great advice, is what do you think I care about the most? Man, that's powerful stuff. Well, I know that we need to wind this down because you have important things you need to get done. And I have taken enough of your valuable time, but it has been absolutely lovely speaking to you.
Yeah, my pleasure.
So if people wanted to reach out to you, Alice, and ask questions, get to know you a little bit better, how would they do that?
My LinkedIn.
LinkedIn, okay, which we will have in our show notes for anyone listening. But this has been really wonderful. If you do want to get in touch with us, you can reach out to us on any of our social media platforms. We're everywhere, unfortunately, even including TikTok. We are on YouTube. You can click all the links below, and you can email us at hello@thebigpixel.net. So we're going to wrap this one up. Thank you so very much for joining us. And everyone else, we will see you next time.
It's a pleasure. Thanks, David.